Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me and Mr. Roy Schwartz. For those of you who are not aware of Roy Schwartz, he recently caught my attention when I read an article that was written by him about Eternals and Jack Kirby's contribution for CNN International. Roy he wears a lot of hats. He is in marketing. He has been involved with business development. He has been involved with various sectors within the business, whether we are talking about the legal side, whether we are talking about the media, the big techs. But taking out all of his alter egos, deep down inside, like all of us, he is a huge fan of superheroes. And he wrote a book entitled, Is Superman Circumcised? So today, I'm going to be asking him about his journey into the world of comics, and what were the factors that basically led him to write a book with such a bold title. So Roy, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on Superheroes of Arabia, which happens to be my podcast. It's published as a video on YouTube and Facebook. And I can't thank you enough for giving us your valuable time today. I'll start with the question. When was the first time you came across a superhero? It can be anyone.
Well, thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
I mean, superheroes have been around since long before I was born, so I would imagine that even as a baby, I must have had some sort of pajama at some point or bed sheet. The earliest memory I have, and it's funny that you should ask, because just a few months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, I found pictures from that time. I had it in my memory very vaguely, but I didn't know there were pictures, and I just found them. I was 2.5 years old, and I got as a present from a family friend from Scotland a doll, a Superman doll.
Wow.
It was one of those old-timey rubber dolls that had a metal wire inside. They used to make those in the 80s, but I'm sure somebody lost an eye and they stopped.
Was it a Mego doll?
No, it looked like a Mego, just bigger.
Okay, bigger, okay.
And I found 3 pictures of me running around a park with it. And that is my earliest memory of superheroes, of having this Superman doll. And I grew up on the movie. I have watched it since I was a baby, and each few years I discovered new things in it and new meanings in it. I think it's a wonderful, if not the best superhero movie. That's the original 1978 Superman with Christopher Reeve.
No doubt.
And, you know, all little kids love superheroes. Most of them don't read comics. They know them from the cartoons and movies and video games and toys. And I love them too, but as my friends started leaving those things behind for basketball, for, you know, girls, for action movies, I liked those things too, but I never left superheroes behind. I kept them with me.
Right.
And that has accompanied me well into adulthood.
Awesome. So, okay, we have now heard about Roy Schwartz, the toddler, who has been gifted with this Superman doll. When is the time Roy comes across a comic book?
This is a very fun trip down memory lane. So I was born and raised in Tel Aviv in Israel.
Right. Okay.
In the 80s, comic books were not a huge thing. Now, as I'm sure you know, and some of you guys watching or listening might know, in 1985 and 6, DC Comics rebooted its entire line for its 50th anniversary.
Yes.
They rebooted Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. They had this event called Crisis on Infinite Earths, and they basically expunged the entire canon proceeding and relaunched. That's pretty famous among comic book fans. What most people don't know, that from the business side, DC and the parent company, Time Warner, use this opportunity to do a big push to export comics to other countries.
Yes.
Translate them. Definitely in America, that's not a very known fact, and that included Israel. And all of a sudden, you started having these comic books in Hebrew. And at the time, I hatched in 1980. I was 6 years old in 1986. there was a hair salon where my mother would go to get her hair and where she took me to get my haircut.
Right.
That was next door to a bookstore that had a lot of old books and old magazines, including comic books. And that was really my first serious introduction that I would, whether I got my haircut before her or after her, I was more than happy to wait at the bookstore and reading through the magazines, and then I would buy a few. And the old man who ran the shop would love having me around and talking about all kinds of things. He was excited that a young kid found interest in literature, not just comic books. In general, I bought all kinds of things there.
Right.
And that really was my introduction. And I had all the original John Byrne, Man of Steel issues in Hebrew,
Awesome.
all kinds of Batman reprints. And, between that and the Superman movie and the toys, and I was hooked for life.
So basically, you touched upon a very relatable aspect of many people's lives here in Saudi Arabia, because this time when DC Comics started to export their content to the Middle East, it was quite common for us. In fact, all the grocery shops and the mini markets in my neighborhood were having John Byrne Superman issues, Jim Aparo Batman issues translated in Arabic. The only downside about those issues was that the cover would be colored, but the inside pages would be black and white. And that really ticked me off.
See, for me, they would flip right to left because, classical languages and, contrast to English and Latin languages go right to left.
Yeah.
As a kid, it would drive me crazy that Superman's S was flipped. Bugged the hell out of me.
Okay, so that's like the first point, and I think I'm glad you mentioned this, because from our generation, people who are living here in Saudi Arabia, people who are living in the UAE, Kuwait, all of them have gone through the same experience as you have done so. So now, that is the first starting point for you to become mesmerized with the world of comics. You became a fan of Superman when you were a toddler, but comics when you were 6 years old. And then comes a time when you complete your studies and then you move to Long Island, New York. You are pursuing your career and everything. It's not an easy job completing your degree. It's not an easy job getting married and having children. And I'm sure that your family would also be lecturing you about, leaving this cartoony stuff and focus more on the real life situations. But you got deeper. Why?
And that's a good question. I more than one person has told me that if my brain understood the stock market the way it understands comic books, I'd be Warren Buffett. Well,
that's the highlight of this interview.
Yeah, exactly right. That's your quote. That's your pull quote.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky in that I am married to the most amazing woman, and the book is actually dedicated to her. And I say in the book, when I was a kid and I wasn't sure what the right thing to do is, I would just ask myself, what would Superman do? And as an adult, I ask myself, what would my wife do? She's just the best human being I have ever met. A real life superhero with, just a good person. And I'm very lucky in that she's also very supportive, up to a point. Sometimes she reminds me we're still trying to save for the kids' college fund, but.
But the thing is, you got married to her at a later stage in life, and obviously, while you're growing up, you're in your teens and you're in college, and before she comes into your life, because a lot of us are really blessed, because I know a dear friend of mine, he is a very active member of the community, and he has his own toyseum. And the reason why he has his own toyseum, he's our age basically, is because his wife is supportive.
Right.
So, but before the wife part, the real struggle, when you're going through puberty, when you have to get good grades, when you have to make sure you get a good job, because in our generation, the social revolution didn't happen. So, and you are, basically carrying this passion of yours. how are you managing to do that? And how are you able to basically get the gist of it, the depth of it?
It's a good question. There's two answers to it. And one is, I had a hard time, and I figured this out somewhere around middle school, high school. I had a hard time concentrating on things that weren't comic books because my mind constantly went to comic books.
Yeah.
And things that related, and then I realized, wait, but if I actually write about comics and study comics and read about comics, I don't need to think about other things. I'm very happy. And I spent my academic career, my bachelor's studies, I have an interdisciplinary master's from NYU.
Yeah.
Interdisciplinary is sort of like a dual master's. I wrote pretty much all my papers about sci-fi and comic books and superheroes. I wrote about, and it did pretty well. Some professors were really on board and thought it was very cool. Some looked down their nose at it and thought it was silly. Some started out as the one, but I convinced them to become the other. It ranges. Okay. And my book, which is titled "Is Superman Circumcised? The Complete Jewish History of the World's Greatest Hero," is actually loosely based on my grad school thesis, which won second place in the NYU annual thesis competition out of more than 400 people. So it got accepted. It was well received. The other part is, I moved to New York thinking that I want to make a full-time living doing comics.
Right.
And I interned for Marvel Comics, which was a great education and a lot of fun. I made a lot of friends.
Sorry, I'm going to hold you there.
Sure.
Who was the editor-in-chief?
Back then, it was Joe Quesada, and I worked mostly with Axel Alonso, who was senior editor before he became editor-in-chief and then left, and now it's C.B. Kowalski, right?
Yeah.
And I have to say, I worked with a few people there, and Axel Alonso as the editor I worked with, and Chris Allo, who was in charge of artist relations, and now he's an artist agent.
Right.
And Am Hatmaker, who was in the toy department and actually recently won second place in the U.S. Lego Masters. We have all stayed friends, and they have all been amazing people. So they're worthy of being mentioned. But what I realized is that it's very glamorous to do it if you like this stuff, and it's a lot of fun, but it doesn't actually pay well, and there's no job security. So people get fired every 5 minutes, every time, a company buys it, moves, whatever. It doesn't pay that well. Publishing just doesn't. The comic books themselves don't make that much money compared to everything else that's based on them, right? Whether it's the toys, the movies, or the video games. I remember I interviewed for the role of marketing manager for, back then it was a brand new graphic novel imprint of one of the largest publishers in the world. It was a senior position. And when they first offered me the salary, I wasn't sure if they were joking, if it was a typo, if I heard them wrong, but that was a salary. So, I love comics, but, I also like to eat.
Yeah.
I want to live in a place that's bigger than a shoebox, and I want to be able to afford my wife and children comfortable living.
Exactly.
So I did more business writing, and I discovered that I had a natural talent for, as well as an interest in legal writing, which is its own little niche.
Yeah.
I always say I'm a translator. I translate legal language into simple English and vice versa.
Right.
And I, worked in that, and I sort of went up the ranks. And now a few years later, I run a department of marketing and biz development for a regional law firm with 3 offices, and I run the department. And it's a good living, alhamdulillah, it's a good living. I do well.
He knows. He's from our neighborhood.
I used to know more. Yeah. I forgot. Maybe I'll remember today.
Hey, you're a New Yorker now.
Yeah, exactly right. So I make a good living, and there's job security, and there's benefits, and I like what I do. And it's almost like the corporate equivalent of being a comic book editor, because a little bit of everything. Some ads, some graphic design, some websites, some pitch packets, some, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that allows me to pursue my true burning passion, which is comic books.
Right.
My previous book is an illustrated horror fantasy, spooky fantasy for 8 to 12-year-olds called The Darkness in Lee's Closet.
Lee's Closet, yes. The Darkness in Lee's Closet.
It was fun, and it did okay. But this book, thankfully, is doing very well, and that's a Superman Circumcised. It's basically a history / cultural criticism. It's a nonfiction book,
Right.
And that's really the arc of my career. That really brings us back to the book.
Okay. Now, here's the thing. I mean, it's one thing to focus on the character. It's one thing to focus on the character's superpowers. And it's a whole different ballgame when you start focusing on the creators that were behind him and their background. So what was it really intriguing? I mean, besides you being Jewish and besides me being Muslim, both of us coming in from the Abrahamic background, what was the most intriguing part that landed you with that title?
No. Also, it's another good question. I wish every interview had these good questions. Actually, make me think. I think
you wrote a wonderful book. I mean, that just blew up my mind, man.
Thank you. That's right. The book is a research-based work. I actually got a fellowship from the New York Public Library, and I was a writer in residence for 2 years. There's not including comics, there's almost 200 sources in the book. It has 41 pages at the end of endnotes and bibliography. You can use it to teach Jewish studies or history or comic books or whatever.
Right.
But I wrote it so it's actually fun to read, and that's the difference. So it's not heavy and kind of awkward and cumbersome. The simple argument is that context is content. That the historical and cultural context of the creation of comic books and superheroes and Superman inevitably, unavoidably found its way into the content and into the stories. And it has been noted before, but it has never been investigated in depth. Nobody's ever said, okay, yeah, there's similarities, but what does that mean? Is there more? Where is this taken from? What is the evolution of these ideas? What can we learn from that?
Right.
Or has anybody looked past 1945 for some reason? And there's a ton. Especially during the 60s and 70s, what in comic book parlance is called the Silver Age and the Bronze Age of comics, there is a ton. And nobody has looked at this before, which, when I first discovered that, the first thought came to mind is, how come nobody's written about this? And then the second thought is, I will write about this. And that's sort of my impetus for writing the book, that I felt somebody had to do this. And if nobody else has, I will.
And you are specifically referring to what is this that no one has written? If I ask you to say it in a shortest sentence possible.
Shortest sentence possible. The superhero, the comic book medium.
Yeah.
Jewish invention. The superhero genre is a Jewish invention. Yes. The very first superhero, Superman, is a Jewish invention who is also a Jewish character, rich in Jewish symbolism and signification.
Right.
Themes that are rich and consistent. And the very easiest, and also the for those who are sort of into comic books, maybe also the most famous example, think of Superman's origin. To save baby Kal-El's life from the doom of the people of Krypton, his father puts him in a small rocket ship and sends him into the unknown. He crash lands in the field in Kansas. He's found by the Kents. They rename him, he grows up, and then he becomes this great savior. That is the story of Moses. Put in a basket, sent down the Nile, right? But there's more. For example, one thing people didn't discuss, if you remember the Christopher Reeve movie from 1978, when he turns 18, he hears this calling. And he goes to the North Pole and he crosses the wilderness of the North Pole. There's the Fortress of Solitude, where he sees the hologram of his father, this bright apparition in white. And he says, I am your father, Jor-El. He tells him where he comes from.
Yeah.
And he bestows upon him the mantle, the responsibility of becoming a great savior, and sends him back into the world. Well, when Moses turns 18, he escapes Egypt. He crosses Midian. He comes across the burning bush. There's a bright apparition who says, I am the God of your father. One is ice, one is fire, but it's the same thematic balance. And he says, you are an Israelite. You are one of the Hebrew slaves. Go back and be a savior. And he goes back and he performs miracles in the name of, it's all there. And
awesome. This is like the entire story of, we refer to all the prophets of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, peace and blessings be upon him. and his family and his brother Harun. I mean, guys, you see for yourself that this one story, which is mentioned in the Torah and mentioned in the Bible as well as the Quran, and how that inspires Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster to create this guy.
Right, exactly. And here's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So they didn't sit down and say, "Oh, let's take Moses and give him a cape and muscles and make him Superman." It's a lot of it subconscious, and a lot of it they just sort of drew. They drew on a lot of their background. One of the things that I use in my book. So Superman was created by two Jewish teenagers from Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. They created sort of the prototype version in 1934 when they were 17.
And he was the bad guy.
The original, right? The reign of the Superman. He basically, that version became Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
And they borrowed a lot of elements. And Jerry Siegel, the writer of the two, Jerry Siegel was the writer, Joe Shuster was the artist. Jerry Siegel wrote a memoir in 1979, and that memoir never got published and got lost. And it only got discovered in 2011. And only one guy before me wrote about it. And it was Larry Ty, who wrote Superman, the High-Flying History of the World's Greatest Hero, which is like a general biography of the character. Doesn't have anything particularly thematic in that sense.
Right.
And the original manuscript that he found is in the Columbia University libraries, and I went there. I scanned the whole thing and I read it. And Jerry Siegel says, here are all the influences that I borrowed from to create Superman.
Okay.
And some of them are Tarzan and John Carter of Mars and Popeye. And
even Popeye.
Yeah, Popeye. He said, I love the idea, and I thought that instead of humor, that could also work as action. Popeye, right? It's all in the book. I detail all these influences, and it's great. And he talks about how the emotional urge to create Superman came from the Nazi persecution of his family in Europe and the rising anti-Semitism in America, which is a very scary time. And he talks. There's quite a few influences. It's a collage. Superman is a collage character. He cobbled it together, and he also talks about Jewish influences. He talks about Samson
and Goliath. Okay.
Right. And he talks about the Golem of Prague, which is a very famous European Jewish legend of basically like a Frankenstein made of mud and given life.
Frankenstein, yes.
And that's also in the book, and he talks about that. And we have Moses, and he just borrowed different elements and put them together. And he wasn't thinking, oh, this is my heritage. He just, I know this story. It's cool. Let's use it. And it all kind of mixed together. And while Superman is, to a large extent, based on Samson and Moses and all that, Clark Kent is based on Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. They based Clark Kent on themselves.
Yeah.
Superman was their fantasy. Clark Kent was their reality. They were these shy, nebbishy, uncomfortable...
small town kids.
Yeah, they're geeks before there was a term for geeks.
Yeah.
They loved science fiction when the word science fiction was new.
Yeah. Ron Hubbard was discovering it.
Yeah, he was, yeah. We talk about Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury's very famous, very first published work ever was in Jerry Siegel's fan magazine as a teenager that he photocopied in his high school photocopier, mimeograph machine. It goes that far back. And Jerry Siegel even modeled as Clark Kent for Joe Shuster when he drew it. They just
Jerry Siegel modeled Clark Kent based on Joe Shuster.
No, so Joe Shuster was the artist and Jerry Siegel was the writer. When Joe Shuster had to draw Clark Kent, Jerry Siegel often modeled as him for Joe Shuster to draw.
Wow.
Because they based him on themselves. They were both, so Jerry Siegel was more chubby, Joe Shuster were more skinny, but they were both shy, hunched, glasses, awkward. And they based that on their visual selves as well as their personality. And Superman on their fantasy as well, all kinds of influences, biblical and otherwise. And I think that's beautiful. It's a great, great story. And they said in one interview that in the back of their minds, the big S on the chest stood for Siegel and Shuster as well.
Yeah, of course.
How's that for fantasy?
And some of the things that I've learned through you today, I hope all of the viewers who are watching this interview find it very rewarding experience, if you will, because it's one thing to be able to know the bits and pieces about a certain character, and it's something else to find it as a confirmed through a piece of document written by the creator themselves, attesting the fact that, okay, what were the influences? And till now, I'm surprised that Popeye was one of his
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Moses, yes, the Prophet Moses is related, no surprise. Samson, not a surprise, but Popeye, my God, my God. So, okay, now here's the thing. I mean, from Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, we move on to many other names that come in. And there's another company, Timely, that later becomes Marvel. Now, the Silver Age, or the Marvel Age, sorry, not the Silver Age, but the Marvel Age, when it gets started, it's you only remember 3 names at the top. Of course, there are more. So you have Stan Lee, you have Jack Kirby, whose real name is Jacob Kurtzberg, and then you have Steve Ditko.
Right.
So 2 Jewish guys, and one, I don't know, Steve Ditko was a Presbyterian or a Methodist, I don't know, but basically non-Jewish.
Right.
From the Christian background. Now, later on, I see, I'm forgetting the name of this, Gene Colan.
Mm-hmm.
We have Gil Kane. We have Neil Adams. Each and every one of them has, I'm not saying that the non-Jewish personalities didn't contribute into the world of comics. But even if we come down all the way to the 70s, one of the most shocking comic book stories turns out to be written by a guy called Jerry Conway, the night Gwen Stacy died.
Mm-hmm.
So, and throughout the earlier decades, we see this Judeo-Christian community of people from that background, whether they were believers or non-believers, that's a different story, but they came from that background. And was it their religious community background that contributed to the concept of heroism, or was it something else?
It's a good question, and I think that it absolutely was, is part of the argument that I kind of trace through the book. If we go to the first days, the 1940s, after Superman shows up and it explodes, right? It becomes this kind of industry. So we have Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and then comes Batman. Batman was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, birth names Milton Finger and Robert Kahn. All these Jews anglicized their names. That was the thing to do back then.
Yeah.
Captain America, Jack Kirby, Joe Simon and Jack
Kirby.
Jaime Simon and Jacob Kurtzberg. Stan Lee started as Stanley Martin Lieber.
Yes.
You mentioned Gil Kane, Eli Katz.
Gil Kane was Eli Katz.
Eli Katz. And they all, Will Eisner was William Irwin Eisner. Some of them changed more, some of them changed less. Jack Kirby wrote under almost 20 pen names for all kinds of reasons, and none of them were Jewish.
Right. Yes.
Kirby was very Irish sounding, and his parents were not happy about it, but he wanted to sound all American. It may be hard for today's audience to understand, but the thing to do back then was to pass. There was no such thing as, you can be proud of your heritage all you want, but in public, when you interact, the homogeneous norm was WASP in America. That was just all American, was basically white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. That's what you passed for. And by the way, that's what Clark Kent does, right? He was born on Krypton with the name Kal-El.
Yeah.
El in Hebrew is God, right? It's one of the names of God. It's also the beginning of Elohim. It's one of the names of God.
And is the meaning a voice of God, Kal-El?
No. So Kal doesn't actually have much of a meaning in Hebrew. It might be taken to mean light or ephemeral, but some people have claimed that Kal-El together means the voice of God or the vessel of God or all that is God. I don't think that's the case at all.
I see.
They play with roots in a way that's just not correct. I think they're reading too much into it,
right,
and shoving too much stuff into it waters down what really is there. The guy's last name means God in Hebrew. For a couple of Jews who went to synagogue, went to Hebrew school, knew the language of the high holidays, they knew what they were doing. Consciously or unconsciously, it was there, It's like, oh, you're going to name a character with the last name Allah. No, you don't notice that. You didn't notice that ever. Of course, So you have this guy with the Hebrew name Kal-El.
Yeah.
Who comes to America, anglicizes his name to Clark Kent.
Yes.
Michael Chabon has this great line. He says, Clark Kent. Only a Jew would come with a name like that for himself. It's a great line.
Good.
It's in The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which I also analyze in my book, and the great novel. And he passes, right? He passes as a generic Gentile, but every time that he wants to assert himself, he can just step into a phone booth or whatever and take off his clothes. And what is his costume? His costume are the baby blankets, or the fabrics his mother wrapped him in when she sent him from Krypton. It's his ethnic fabrics. It's his heritage. Right, that's his habit. When he declares who he is, it's not just the personal. It's also he's declaring his ethnic. He's declaring his racial. He's declaring his cultural background, all in one act.
Right.
So he's this, again, in the context of the 30s and 40s, he's this ultimate assimilation / assertion fantasy of the ability to go back and forth. You can assimilate with the world, or you can declare. In Judaism, you have the talit, which sort of functions in a similar way. Religious Jews wear it under their clothes, and then when it's a high holiday, wear it outside of their clothes.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a similar concept. And that's a very, very powerful metaphor. And you look at the context of the times, America had a very strict immigration policy called the Johnson-Reed Act that got passed in 1924.
Right. And
when the Holocaust happened, they just weren't letting people in. They just weren't. We're talking about a trickle of a few thousand out of millions and millions. And the American Jews were very frustrated, very angry, very fearful. They had families in Europe, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And one of the things I point out, in July 1939, there was something called the Voyage of the Dam, when the St. Louis, a ship with a bunch of refugees that escaped Europe, literally as the Nazis were coming in on the port to grab them, like Hollywood-style suspense. They made their way to Florida as refugees, begging for asylum.
Right.
They got denied and turned around back to Europe, and most of them ended up in the camps and died. The same month, Superman #1 comes out. The story about a refugee put in a small vessel and sent to America, where he's not turned around, where he's taken in and accepted and raised in American values. And what happens? He pays back the culture 100-fold. He becomes a loyal citizen. He becomes a helpful citizen. How is that for a metaphor at that time? And amazing, not just and it's both for Americans and for immigrants, because he is a promise to Americans that immigrants are not clannish and disloyal and subversive, but actually they come to help and be part of the culture, and a promise to immigrants that this is going to be a welcoming home and where they finally can really rise to their potential. It's a reminder that being, you have this all-American icon who's a reminder that being an immigrant in America is an all-American concept.
It's an American concept.
And I think it's a beautiful metaphor and so powerful in the context of the time.
I wasn't aware of these because most of my knowledge pertains to the World War II history, the Nazi death camps, the Holocaust. But what was the level of anti-Semitism in the US? My knowledge was very much restricted to the Deep South, if you will. But the North was all cool. This was my concept. But now what I'm hearing from you, and especially the kind of a refugee policy that was there, that while Holocaust is at an all-time high, and next thing you know, refugees aren't being allowed in. It's like the crisis we saw recently in Syria.
Yeah.
And
So just I'll answer that very briefly, because I don't want to get into too deep into the stuff. I want this to be fun and not dark. But every culture turns its history into mythology at some point. Right. And we tell ourselves the stories we want to hear, and we remember what we want to remember. Every culture is guilty of this.
Every culture, yes.
Just like every person remembers about their past what's convenient, right? It's the same thing. And in the case of America, they have sort of whitewashed just how racist the past was and how anti-Semitic it was as well. And the truth is, it was damn scary. In 1939, the same year, there was a German-American party called the German-American Bund. They had a march down Fifth Avenue in New York City. New York City was the largest Jewish community in the world.
Yeah.
It was more than twice the size of the second largest in Warsaw at the time.
Right. Okay.
They had a march down Fifth Avenue from the Lower East Side to Madison Square Garden. 22,000 Nazis. 22,000. That's a huge parade. They fill up Madison Square Garden. In Yaphank, Long Island, they had a militia training camp, armed combat training camp right in New York.
Wow.
Right. The anti-Semitism was huge. The number 2 newspaper in the country, the Dearborn Independent, was rife with anti-Semitic rhetoric. The number 1 radio show, that was Henry Ford, who was not only a huge anti-Semite, he actually received the swastika medal, the Iron Cross from Hitler himself, for his contribution. Ford. Yeah, Henry Ford. It's all in the book. People.
Henry Ford.
Henry Ford was a committed racist who did not want anybody who wasn't white or Christian in America, and was like hardcore racist, old school racist, like let the Germans kill them all, it's all good. Charles Lindbergh, the greatest American hero, the guy who crossed the Atlantic, was an anti-Semite who talked against the Jews nonstop. Father Coughlin, the number 1 radio personality, was an Irish Catholic priest. He had the number 1 radio show in America, nonstop talked about the Jews, propagated conspiracy theories like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and all this kind of, the Jews are coming to take over and corrupt your children. It was everywhere. And it was a very, very, very scary time. It's only natural psychologically. Superman was what's in psychology called the reaction formation. Sort of like, oh, you say I'm this, let me show you what I really am. That's sort of what it means. It's very natural for a couple of teenagers who are both personally and culturally looked down upon to invent this character who is a Superman, who is super beloved and super popular and super confident and super capable and invulnerable. For Jews during the Holocaust to invent a character who is invulnerable means something.
And this is an eye-opener to know the historical context that led to 2 teenagers from Cleveland, Ohio, to come up with the greatest icon, the first superhero, the man who would fly in the air faster than a speedy bullet. How important is the Abrahamic tradition? Because I use the word Abrahamic tradition because the story of Moses is part of Jewish heritage, Christian heritage, as well as Muslim heritage. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for, we call Prophet Solomon, then we Muslims, we also believe in Jesus as well. So how important is the Abrahamic tradition in giving the world, the modern world, the gift of heroism or superheroism?
Your questions are one after the other winners. Great job. They are everything. If you look, the first story ever told is a superhero story. The Epic of Gilgamesh, 3200 BCE.
Okay.
Old school, right? It's the first written story that we know about. It's Sumerian cuneiform. It's a story about a superhero. He's 1/3 god, don't ask me how that works, who has super strength and super stamina, who goes on adventures fighting monsters and evil gods in the name of glory and searching for immortality.
Yeah, yes.
Look at that. The gods, to stop him, create Enkidu the wild man, a dark version of himself, and sends him to fight him. The two meet, fight, only to realize that they're very much alike, team up, become best friends, and go and take down the other gods. So both the superhero concept and even the team up, the Batman v Superman idea.
The world's finest.
It's 5,000 years old, man. It's all been there. And I think that's great. And these are stories that were so resonant that we basically invented the written word so we can preserve and share them. And but what makes Gilgamesh a hero is that he's very strong and very brave, but he is not an altruistic hero. He's not a defender. He's not a champion of the common man, of the oppressed. He's not there to help anybody. He's there for glory and immortality and riches, and that's it.
Right.
The
heroes, macho guy, if you will.
Right. I mean, he's a third god. I guess he's allowed, but still. Mm. And then you look at other traditions, and I'm going to limit ourselves to the more Western hemisphere because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
But you look at Greco-Roman, Hercules, Jason and the Argonauts, Odysseus, all these guys, they're all heroes. But they're heroes because they're strong. They're heroes because they're smart. They're heroes because they're brave. But they don't care about other people.
Yeah.
I could go into Beowulf is the same. They're there for glory, for riches, for personal score setting. They find themselves in positions where they save other people or defend other people, but that's not their purpose. They are not there for the community. The concept of heroism is rooted in dedication to and sacrifice for your community, in collectivism, in caring for your fellow man, in the sanctity of life, because we are created in God's image. That all comes from the Abrahamic religions. That all comes from the heroes and prophets and kings of the Bible, whether it's the Torah or Testament or Quran. That's where it comes from. That's the morality that, that's the root of it. And things have evolved and changed since then, but that's the germ, that's the root of everything.
And the beauty of this this tradition is the fact that even it takes a character from the pagan mythos, Thor. If it wasn't for Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Thor would not have been as popular or may have been part of the Avengers like we find him today.
Yeah, no, there's this endless discussion of who contributed how much to the creation of each character. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It's a can of worms. That's its own podcast. We can't get into that now.
Yeah.
But I will say that anybody who says just one did all the work and the rest just stole credit doesn't get it. They're absolutely collaborative effort. Different cases, different levels of collaboration, and I'm not going to get into the nuance, but both together.
Both together, yes.
Their co-creations mostly between 1961 and 1968, they created together the Fantastic Four, Hulk, Iron Man, Ant-Man, the Avengers, the X-Men, Stan Lee created with Steve Ditko with some input from Jack Kirby, Spider-Man.
Black Panther
they created. It was a period of manic creativity. I think I said this in the CNN article that you read, that you mentioned early on, that was unprecedented and ultimately unsurpassed by either. It was the magic formula of those two chemicals together that really made everything happen.
True.
And they borrowed from everywhere, and Thor, as you said, is Norse mythology, right? Is Germanic mythology. And some of their creations have very strong Jewish elements, particularly Fantastic Four and Spider-Man.
Yes.
And some not so much. And some you can find maybe the historical context. Black Panther, for example, was created in a bit of the later stage, but still of the civil rights movement, the Black Civil Rights Movement of America. The non-Black group that was most supportive of it was Jews. The Freedom Riders, the people who went down to the South to fight it, Jews were less than 3% of the population, more than 30% of those people.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech was co-written with his best friend who was Jewish. So you could talk about the historical context of that kind of, but in terms of substance, Jack Kirby based the thing on himself. Jack Kirby, the son of Jacob Kirby, the son of Ben Kirby, named his character Benjamin Jacob Kirby.
Right.
Benjamin Jacob
Grimm.
Who Jack Kirby's from the Lower East Side. Grimm is from the Lower East Side. Jack Kirby had thick eyebrows and chumped cigars. The Thing has thick eyebrows and chumped cigars.
Yeah.
They both have a temper.
Yeah.
And the Thing, of course, now in the comics is canonically Jewish.
I think it has been one of the most enriching discussions I've had in a long time about not just comics, but about the entire philosophy of superheroism. And I think it's this era will be remembered as one of the greatest eras in human history, because unlike other things in life that get politicized, that get discriminated, I mean, here we have a story which you put out for Superman. And this character, among many other characters, I will also include Captain America, who happens to be, I mean, my most favorite, one of the most favorite characters.
He's my favorite.
And I mean, these characters would bring people together from different backgrounds, whether they are religious backgrounds, whether they are socio-economical backgrounds. Anyone who got in touch with these characters through comics or animations or movies or whatever have you, it's like a growing global fraternity. Yeah. But I hope that they appreciate and they understand the important role that the Abrahamic tradition played and the value of superheroism that has been given, which unfortunately in today's highly politicized, highly toxic environment, we are seeing the far left, woke left, and the alt-right, and each and every one of them is like, trying to stretch this beautiful work of art.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot to, the lessons that superheroes have to teach us are simple. But they're still very important. These are the simplest, most important lessons that we should teach ourselves again and again and again, because we forget. Brotherly love, that we're all one people around the world, all of us. We're all brothers, right? That to be kind and to help each other and to improve together. To quote the Superman movie, we can be a great people. We wish to be. We only lack the light to show the way.
To show the way, exactly.
And superheroes are good reminders of that. They're very, very good role models.
We are approaching the end of this interview. I would like to know, is your book available on Amazon?
Thank you. So my book is available. I'm not sure about Saudi Arabia and bookstores, but definitely on Amazon. Digital book is available as well. You can get an Apple Books, the Nook, whatever service is available. And I would assume that most bookstores can also order it because it's available through the main distributors.
Great. With what Roy has said right now, I'm going to be sharing the link, the Amazon.com link for his book. Make sure to buy it, read it, share your thoughts with me, and I'll be more than glad to pass them on to Roy. And I am also pleased to inform all of the viewers right now that there will be a part 2 of this interview once I have read his book myself.
I look forward to it, yeah.
Roy, thank you very much. I'm basically at a loss for words.
Shukran for having me.
Habibi, enta uyun. So, because what you have shared based on your discourse in this particular realm is very valuable for anyone who loves comics, for anyone who loves superheroes. And the good thing about it is that a lot of events in your past, I'm sure a lot of my viewers will find common ground with you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you soon for the next one.
Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to my Facebook page and YouTube channel. Also, sign up on Patreon for extra